recording and
Thanks for the summary.
sure.
So I do wonder about this, whether there's a general principle of we've got some things we need in this area. Should we leave discussing them in more detail until later and come back on this? I wonder whether we're getting a little bit derailed by this one, because it's very interesting and there's a lot of good technical stuff here. But
Yeah,
should we?
that's why I agree with you, Peter. Like, give me just welcome everyone. I want to kind of intro. Welcome everyone. The multi-network community sync. Today is June 7th. On the agenda, I want to touch something on the CAP that we currently have posted. There was someone's question. I'm not sure who posted that one. And then final, keep talking about the DRA integration. And Pete, can we back to your question and ask to the when we get there? Is that okay with
Yeah,
you?
sure. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna be quick. I got feedback about the CAP from team. One main recommendation from his point of view for how he manages the caps was he didn't really felt that approach where we would have a cap per phase. So what he's proposing is to just convert the current cap, the requirements cap that we posted, as the cap that we are going just to update incrementally. So the change, what we're going to happen is to kind of not mention that we are going to create a separate cap per phase. It's just to keep updating the cap. So basically the first phase is just the story and requirements. And then we will post the phase one, the one stuff that we are talking about, and we will keep updating this single cap about all those things. And this will make this cap, of course, unfortunately, long-lived. Maybe fortunately, because we would have to handle like the versioning of the APIs anyway. We cannot like go to GA in probably next year, because unless we will have the full confidence around this, but I'm talking about the APIs themselves to go to V1. Unless we will build enough confidence to say yes, let's just go V1, and from that point on we will just update those, add things as the phases goes. So that was one kind of concern from his side about the APIs and how long will they be in alpha or beta. But I think we will have to just handle it as we go. Any other questions on the cap site? Any concerns around that approach, slight change of approach? I think this is just like kind of maintenance piece, so not a big thing. Then I'm going to this question. Anyone present ask this?
Yeah, this was mine, and I don't want this to turn
Okay.
into a big long discussion or derail things. I just wanted to check, because I realize it's something that it hasn't been discussed in any of the meetings I've been in, and I know I've missed a few, so it might have been brought up. But there's obviously some changes actually on the node to go and implement these networks. I don't know if there's been any discussion of how that would work, where my assumption is that there'll be a change to kubelet to have a different CRI interface. I'm quite happy to accept this hasn't been discussed yet. Let's push it down the road a little bit, but I wanted to ask if it had been covered.
That has not been covered, Pete. But what I am always and constantly pushing back on, that CRI approach of doing this thing is one of the implementations. It's not the way to do it. I think this is where you might have a misconception on how this can be done.
So I accept anything within the runtime is outside of scope, but presumably if we had to make changes to the kubelet, those would be in scope.
Or that are you thinking? Yeah, I agree. Yes, so, if we were to make sure that we can pass. That's something. The thing here is, okay, bear with me, because CRI right now is to create a container. I know it's handling. No, and I will put a stop there. Antonio is not here. He has much more context around this one, and you were in discussion with him on the chat, right? You saw that. I read through that, and you saw his approach that he wouldn't want to push back kubelet into handling networking at all.
Yeah, and I'm happy with that. I just wanted to double check whether it had been discussed in these meetings and whether we've got a position or whether we're going to come back in more detail later. So let's come back to that later. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Thanks for
that. Exactly. And I will just ask this. All right. And now, Pete, anything else around this one?
No, I think that's fine. There's a bunch of interesting details, but let's not derail them. We're trying to bring them out here.
Okay. So now, now DRA dynamic resource allocation and integration to it. I'm not sure. Do we have some folks from the CAP? Maybe, I'm not sure. I don't see.
Yeah, I don't think we do.
I don't think we do. I don't see any of the usual suspects. So, Pete, you mentioned that we might, it might slightly derail our thing. This is something that we can decide today, because I have some proposals, and it boils down right now to the APIs and how we're gonna use them. Because why I'm saying that, the current approach of the DRA, I love the scheduler changes and the capabilities. This is something that we definitely, this is what Michael, you touched on. When we're gonna be in phase 2 and we're gonna talk about those services, I am not planning it right now. My proposal, and probably we will all agree on that, is just to reuse DRA for the scheduler side of the things. We're gonna leverage all that. That's what I would imagine. We're going to design these. What I would think is we are going to write a upstream version, a core version of the controller to which the scheduler is going to ping to, and it will answer to the scheduler about where specific network is available on which nodes. So what I'm thinking about for that one, and that's easiest as work, because we don't have to mess around with the core scheduler. We already have the APIs. We just need to write this controller. That is going to be not a custom one. It will be a kind of custom, but provided by the Kubernetes. And then we will give a capability for users to, if you wish, you can change that and create your own. This is a reference. This does the core capabilities. But if you want to do something slightly different or more sophisticated, be my guest and replace that controller with your own version. This is where I see DRA is awesome and gives us a really great solution for that piece, right? But DRA comes with the API changes to the pod, right? And they mentioned that, changing anything in the core components comes with a kind of, you have to have a very well-defined arguments to do that, right? So my thinking is, should we maybe leverage that part as well, right? And then lastly, there goes the bottom side on the kubelet, where they do have ability to pass a string. Right now, it's just a pass of the string, and this is something for you, Pete, what you were referring to the CRI. Maybe we can already just leverage that DRA already passing that strings of what sort of resources I am asking for, and we can leverage that and drive on that to, okay, we already have an implementation. Why bother with something completely new? So under the hood, I would love to reuse most of those things. The thing here is, what we are doing here up front, I already said, like, we definitely cannot use the claims, the resource claims objects, the templates and the standard one for us, because we need to have a proper network representation in API. That's the core reason of this whole effort. So that is a no-go. I'm not moving on that. We need to have a core object which can be referenced and can have a full representation of a network in Kubernetes. So that's something that I am not moving on. At least from our point, that's the whole point for us to even start this whole effort. So I'm not moving on that one. So if that's the case, then what we are doing with the rest of the APIs, right? Can we leverage some of the pods stuff? And this is where we can make, and I want to hear your opinions on. So I managed to put together something. Let me here share this stuff. So maybe to step back. This is the doc that I was we are constantly working on, right? Attaching pod network to pod, right? What I was proposing is, okay, let's have a field, and that field will have some special struct, which will introduce the pod network name, so basically the name to which network I am attaching to, and some additional parameters, right, to that attachment. So basically, I am providing some capability of options for that directly to that attachment, right? But that will be that's something that we kind of was thinking. This was the kind of example of how that will look like, right? But now, if we were to look at the DRA, and I constructed something like this. So DRA comes with something called a claim source. Claim source, if I'm not mistaken, is defined. If you look at the kinds in the pod, is containers, and this is on the level of the core spec. There is a resource claims, and then the name, and basically this is a list of claim source objects. And this guy has a name and a source. And what I'm thinking, what if we could expand this claim source, what they use, with pod network? Don't look at this one yet. I'll get there for a second. But what if we could pod network name, or what did we use here? Pod network. If we were to introduce to their alpha API a pod network name, and then what it would look like, it would look like this. Right, we have the resource claim, a name, source, and all this, right? This gives us a lot of reusability. We would have to change from their point of view what they do with this field, right? Initially, we could say do nothing because right now we don't need any of the scheduler pieces. What the only thing it could do is just pass it along to the CRI. So this is where any CRI side implementation can handle it if they want to. But this is where the API would this bit the bug would stop. But the thing here is we are losing all the optionalities, right? Defining what's the primary and any other, the most generic parameters that we could think of. That's what I would think of. Otherwise, I'm not sure. Yeah, that's something that I did draw this, but I'm not convinced. Thoughts, comments? Yes, go ahead, Hans. I'm not sure who first. Pete, you go.
I was second behind Hemi, so I'll let Hemi go.
Yeah, so this DRA alternative here is basically piggybacking back to a network from the resource claim itself. What I had a thought of the opposite. So somewhere in this cap, there was like a parameters ref somewhere. I don't know where.
Yeah. Here. Yeah. Pod network has, let me show an example. Oh, where were you? Here.
So what if we expanded the API of this parameter ref so that it could point to different things? And one of the types of, so let's say that we could have parameters of different types. One of the types would be just plain network parameters that are not associated to any resource allocation or anything. It's just parameters that you're passing on to the network. Mm-hmm. And then you could have another type of parameter that would be resource specific. So parameter that is referencing a resource that could be managed by DRA. So it would be a pointer to the resource claim that you have somewhere else in the pod spec.
But then won't that make those two kind of independent? That's so, and bear with me on this one, why I'm asking this. because keep in mind, as I mentioned before, I would love to reuse the scheduler for this. So I would want to use some of the code that they use for, let's say, scheduling, where we would have the controller. So if you were to do that, what you're saying is you would have two controllers defining the, let's say, the scheduler. You see what I'm saying? Because if the scheduler would see, okay, let's assume we are not going with the API, right? And let's say we have this pod network attachment. So what I would think in phase 2, when we're going to talk about the scheduler, right, things, is their code would see, oh, this is a pod network attachment. Okay, so this is, I'm treating this as like the array. So this is that, the generic, the core controller is hard coded. It's this guy, and I'm gonna ask this guy because I see pod network attachment. And that will be the one call to there to ask for the availability and scheduling. Are you saying then, if I have, who would then parse and say, oh, okay, this network points to another resource claim? Who would do that? And then would you imagine the same code looking at the pod network and checking that piece? And then if he finds on the other side a resource claim, it will do stuff for that one as well? Or that will be, what will that attachment linkage give you?
So of course, my suggestion is a bit incomplete. I didn't think of anything but of everything. But what I'm imagining is that for the parameters of type resource claims,
okay, yeah,
the only reason to point to them from the network would not be to affect the scheduling. The resource claim is able to do that on itself. Mm-hmm. It would be to be able to pass parameters specific, like parameters that might be generated specifically from the allocation of the resource back to the network. So I might be wanting to allocate a resource in a specific node. That resource is allocated. That resource has its own parameters, or whatever they are. And then I want to go on and pass those parameters onto the network attachment so that they can be used to I don't know, for multus that we have seen how a device ID has to be passed somewhere so that the CNI is able to use it. So the only reason we would be pointing from the network to a resource would be somehow adding support somewhere to obtain the parameters that have been generated from that allocation and passing them onto the network.
So, Jaime, I am looking at this as, is there anything in that plan? Is there any engagement of the core for you? Because what I'm seeing is this is something that you could do right now, because keep in mind the params ref is, you can point to anything and it can be the resource claim. Namespace, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think the resource claims, I'm not sure whether they namespace or not, but if they are not, then namespace is optional. So basically what you can do is just reference it right now as is, and just your implementation will see, okay, am I pointing to some of my custom stuff, or am I pointing to a resource claim? I am. So, okay, let me process that. Is there any on that? I guess, what should, yeah, exactly.
So I guess that from what I say, I am asking for something that needs to happen in kubelet that is not happening right now. And that's first is the life cycle, how the resource claims need to be resolved before the pod is attached to the network. And the second thing is something that is not there in kubelet today, which is just to fetch parameters from the DRA and pass them on to the network.
So isn't in your plan, would you still specify the claim inside the pod? In here, in where I had it. So you would have this network attachment saying to pointing to the network, and then you would have this claim source. And here it wouldn't be pod network, it will be just resource claim. Would you still have this piece?
Yes.
Okay, so basically the DRA would deliver you all those things down there. So you would have it in the CRI at least, right? Because if I'm not mistaken, DRA provides them down to the CRI. And you will have it all over there. Can your CNI cannot pick it up from there? because you will have it. So kubelets basically just pass them down to CRI, and now just the CRI has to be slightly modified. And CRI is I would consider outside of core, where it would okay, this is the resource claims. I will pass those as well to the CNI. Would that solve that's what you're asking for?
Probably. I mean, if we are assuming, so what I'm envisioning to be happening in kubelet, if we are assuming it or envisioning for that to happen in the CRI, well, that's another possibility. Yeah.
Yeah. So keep in mind that kubelet. So we have a. I'm not sure if you saw a discussion. There is a discussion on Slack. Pete started it with about exactly are we thinking about any of the CRI API changes, right? And Antonio is kind of opposing, and because the history behind that part is that kubelet stopped handling networking APIs at all, right? Kubelet doesn't at all is aware about networking. It passes all along the pod stuff into the CRI, and then CRI handles it, because the CRI is the one that knows how to handle the network. So that's why kubelet completely offloaded all that into CRI. That's how it is today. And from his word, and Antonio is not here, so I'm just going to be paraphrasing him. He would not want kubelet to get back to the networking business. So there is that. And I'm not sure how that's the kind of sentiment, at least. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Heini, does that say something? I'm not sure how far you would want, how much of information from kubelet you would expect, right? That CRI would give you, right? So that's something that you would have to look whether the DRA capabilities that gives you today is sufficient, right, for you for what you would want to achieve. And I would consider if it's anything in the CRI that will be not out of scope for this cap. So what you're saying, it is possible to do, but at that point, if everything is on the side, right, you specify the resource claim additionally anyway inside the pod, and then you just link those things together, which you can do because this parameters ref can reference anything. Then you're basically good to go. Did I?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that what I'm pointing here to is to establish the relationship. I don't know if the CRI or the I mean, it clearly depends on if we are going to change the CRI or a CNI interface or whatever to support this kind of, because otherwise, if we are not doing anything there, that means that the CNI needs to be completely Kubernetes aware and needs to access the API server to fetch information. And that's a discussion it's probably worth having at some point here, but yeah, probably it's for later.
Right now it is that. I am assuming that approach, Jaime. Do we consider do we consider the CRI implementation, not at the API I do, but the CRI implementation as probably the CRI kind of API skin slightly change to include like the kind of networking parameters or maybe not network parameters, networking information in some form, right? But keep in mind that that information has to be CRI specific. I'm not sure you see that the kind of the problem here is that what sort of parameters you pass to the CRI, because as we discussed, I'm not sure how much you've been engaged here. We have various ways on how the network can be implemented. So every network will have their own parameters, tweaks and blows and whistles. So how you pass them? You cannot have API there that will gonna be support everything. So what you would do is probably just pass the name of the network that a specific pod or pod wants to access. That means the CRI now has to reach out to the Kubernetes API to grab those parameters, and then it has to understand what has to do with them, or pass them along, or just grab them as is, marshal them, and okay, pass them to the CNI. Right, that could happen. right? Is that something that we expect? Is that something that's acceptable? I'm not sure. Do we have someone from the CRI side here? We don't. Michael, maybe you can give us, is that even possible if we were to, I don't know, let's say marshal the whole network plus the parameters, this object into a string and pass that along. And let's say we will have a list of those. And then, okay, CNI, whatever you want to do with them, you do. So maybe we can come up with something very simple like this. I'm not sure how acceptable something like that is.
So just to clarify, that's something that I can possibly envision, given that that's already something that is happening on the CNI, how it can just be really open-ended on the number of parameters that you can pass to it.
Right.
So yeah, so that's something that I can envision as a parallelization between the CNI interface and the CRI interface. I don't know if that's feasible or wanted, or desirable, but yeah.
Yeah, probably that part we can look into the Jaime. Probably, yeah. Let's. We don't have this, but I will add a. Let me just add here a. That will be another bullet to discuss. Let's have it so that we know that it is there, and let's touch on that later on. Okay.
Okay, and I don't really want to come up about a decision. I just want to put the alternative
Okay. Yeah.
on the table, just if it sparks a different ideas or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. Sorry, Pete, for waiting. Yeah, go ahead.
That's fine. I had a fairly small thing to say. So the model here would be that you have a resource claim that points to something that says attached to this pod network. Resource claims have got CRs that they link to and so on, and so you can pretty much get any parameters you like into such resource claims.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel like there's potential here for us to be able to pass arbitrary parameters to a network that way. And so if your network so that could be both standard parameters for a particular pod, like, well, this particular pod wants to have this network interface name or whatever, but also it could be, some crazy SRIOV nonsense that only 3 people in the world care about, but I happen to be one of them.
Sure. Yeah.
So it does feel like there's quite a lot of flexibility there. The one reservation that came to my mind is, I like DRA and it's really powerful. Is it a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and is it just going to be too complicated to implement? On the other hand, it's a thing that already exists, and I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know. It feels like it's worth pursuing this a bit longer, and I'd like to think about it some more. Certainly.
Yeah, that's why we are, right? I think we committed some of the time here to kind of understand DRA, and now we are discussing on, because we kind of were on the verge of how we attach to a pod, right? How we specify that. And DRA, I think that as I mentioned, like most of the DRA capabilities are really useful, and I want to kind of leverage them, definitely. The question is, how do we define the APIs? What you said, it was what I think. I don't remember his name, but basically that was one of the DRA folks kind of his presentation from the initial kind of how we could do that is what you were saying. But my question is then, do we want to, so the alternative to this, what he was proposing was having here, I think that was that was just a, let's call it just a claim, right? So his proposal was to name it claim, and that will point to a some claim, and then there is no this one. Imagine this is not here, and then we had what I want to show here. So imagine this is the claim claim name. And this one points to pod network, right? Params name, and then I have some data plane here. My problem with this approach is the cumbersome of API, and now imagine UX, right? For us, okay, if we do this, maybe, but then we hide. There is no pod network. So how do I, okay, we added multi-networking. Where do in the pod spec, how do I do the resources? Not resources, how do I add the pod networks? How do I define them? Oh, this is the tricky thing. You have to go through this resource. This is the something. You see the UX? The UX is terrible. You want to add you want to add a networking component and reference in the pod, but you have to go through a resource claim thing that kind of not. It's not intuitive. Oh, that's the word I'm missing. Do you agree, Pete, or
I think I agree with that. It looks much nicer if you can have the pod network objects. One thing that is interesting about this, though, is you could probably prototype it. And if it works, you could then think of having a better UI to it. So it might be interesting to play around with some of this stuff because it isn't pod network changes. But yeah,
what do you
agree.
mean? What sort of prototyping you have in mind?
I'm more thinking of sitting down and creating such an implementation. I mean, I guess you could do that by changing the pod spec as well, but could you just create a DRA implementation that gives you multi-network with resource claims? If you could do that, then you just have to make the UX look better.
But that part is already out there, right? DRA is an alpha. You enable that feature, and basically you can do. The problem would be just how do I? No, the problem won't be any problem. We assumed. Keep in mind, and this is what Jaime was just asking about as well. Are we passing those down to the CRI, right? So this aspect, right? Let's assume we go with the, we won't do this in the first phase. Let's do it through the Kubernetes APIs, right? So basically CNI is just a stub. It knows, okay, this pod needs networking and I'm taking over from here. I don't care about what CRI gave me. I'm gonna look through Kubernetes API, right? Let's assume that's the approach. What I'm doing is I'm grabbing the pod. I am aware, my CNI is aware, I'm using resource claims. So I'm going to go look at this, go to the claim, and then go to the parameters and the network. So eventually I am grabbing the network, the data plane network to do my stuff. And I can do it today. But it's up to the implementation. Let's say some multi-networking implementation, we just have to implement that. So that's possible even like today, if someone wants to sit down and create that. And it won't change things, Pete. I don't think it will discover new things because it will just boil down to what the API in the pod is, right? Today you have this piece, right? It's already existing. And if you enable the feature in the APIs, you can just reference these fields and just deal with that, right? So it's a matter of then whether your automation handles this or just this, right? That's what it boils down to. You see my point, Pete?
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's certainly true that having the pod networks there explicitly is much simpler and cleaner as a way of doing things. It doesn't give you all the flexibility, and you might want to add that in, but it gives you. It just gives you a much nicer looking UX. It's easy to explain that to somebody.
Yeah. Any other opinions on this, on what we should do with the DRA? Because if we were not even doing to this claim, right, and we just go with adding the pod network name here, and this is something that probably we could ask them, right? Let's expand this claim source where they have the claim and template defined. Let's expand it to add the pod network name here. And then we handle and take it from here, right? We keep the resource claims piece already in, and we just add it through pod network, right? Like this. My problem with this one is that where do we pass the like direct parameters? Do we do it through the, yeah, I'm not sure. Because then we would have to create some claim anyway with parameters in it, pointing to some parameters. And let's say this will be net interface params. It's quite convoluted then, right? Because I'm not sure. And that one would hold the, let's say, whether the interface is primary or what is the name for the interface. We could do that, but it's again the UX. It's not. Tomo, yeah, go ahead.
Just a minor comments, but so the in the resource claim object, why you added network interface? Is this required? In this
okay,
context?
so this guy, right?
Yeah.
So if you would look at my kind of initial proposal that I think posted back in October last year, in it I had two objects I wanted to introduce. First one was pod network, which we all discussed and we're fully aware. The other thing that I haven't mentioned here in this discussion yet, recent discussion, was the network interface. And basically, this is why everyone says that, like at least from some of the folks, what I'm hearing is DRA just fits exactly to what we're thinking to do. And this is one of the arguments why, because I was like internally, I was as well kind of in my teams as well posting this object. So let me talk to you about this object. This object is to identify and describe single attachment, okay, to a pod. Right now, today, we don't have such thing. Today, the only thing we have as to go to the status of a connection is the pod IP status. You see, I am trying to expand that. So what I mean by that is in a pod spec, you have status, you have pod IPs, right? And you have this. So basically, if you just deal with core Kubernetes today, this is your only information today about interface inside the pod. This is the only information. And basically, this gives you only the IP. And the reason this information is here is because this is used for services and endpoint slices. This is the only reason. It's not to kind of indicate what IP from the networking or debuggability point of view. It's just to indicate so that they can use it for services. So there is an object in Kubernetes today that will tell you what is the name of the interface, what is the MAC address, what are the other blah parameters that you will want to see. So I was thinking and floating an idea to maybe we should introduce a network interface object that would represent an interface and attachment inside the pod, a single attachment into the pod. And basically how it functions similar to, if you remember from the DRA point of view, what I think, it was Patrick, now I reminded myself, when Patrick was saying there is a resource claim and there is a resource claim template. I'm not sure if you remember that, but basically as a source in the here, as a source here, it has two fields here. It can point to a template or to a direct claim. The thing here with the template is they will, if you point to a template, they will create a direct resource claim out of this template. And the other thing is that they are okay with using the claims because apparently multiple pods can reference the same claim resource. Keep in mind, this is a functionality that is a no-go for us because you cannot have two pods pointing to the same network attachment.
So,
all right.
So that this network interface is the parameter is introducing network object, right? So that as you described in the below. And
yeah,
then,
let me go to that. You go ahead.
And another question is in the previous, I mean that the pod network attachment object, you do not have such stuff, right? I mean,
yeah, and I'm throwing that in to kind of draw the analogy between the resource claims and the resource claim template. And I just draw it here so that kind of you all here have the full story about this. That's why I added it. Whether we're gonna have it, I'm not saying it has to be here. I'm just trying kind of something that we thought to have, and I have it in my initial draft back in last year. And I just want to remind you that that was there, and maybe we should have it. Maybe we should consider it. I don't think that's something that I'm just want to kind of, everyone has the kind of context and a picture of where some of the kind of similarities for DRA comes from as well. All right, that's why I'm kind of I wanted to draw it kind of throw that in here so that we have a discussion, and that gives us like another level of reasoning maybe, and we can come to a conclusion that should we have something like that or not. Okay, so that's why just to kind of I don't know, have another argument against or for and in relation to the DRA. And let me maybe just what the naming network attachment, I call it network interface, but maybe network attachment is a better name. But just an example of what it would look like. It would be a object that would user could specify parameters to your pod, and basically that's why I was pointing here as you can point one of these two guys, is because it's similar to the template and the resource claim. I can either just attach to a resource to a template, which is the network, kind of a template, or I can attach to a specific interface attachment, right? The thing here is, as we said, a network attachment can only be attached once. So using network attachment is a no-go for deployments or any type of replica sets, right? Because replica sets would mean I will attach the same network attachment to every pod, and that should not be possible. So that's something that that's the kind of trade-off of referencing directly a network attachment, where you cannot, or you could, but when you reference in any replica set, the replica number has to be only up to 1, right? But
yeah, maybe let's discuss about the design of the network attachment later. But also
okay.
But for now, the network attachment. So if someone is reading this document from top to here, network attachment name is pretty new. So pod network name is maybe the reader can imagine that pod network name is pointing the pod network's name, but the pod network attachment or the network interface is a pretty new terms. So maybe you need to describe some of the stuff. Otherwise,
this doc, Tomo, keep in mind, we are this is an alternative. Don't take everything literally here in this doc. We are working on this is all work. This is a work in progress, this whole doc. So please don't take it so literally. This doc, when it's going to be posted in GitHub as a PR, then I agree with you. But currently we are all on the same page. That's why I am keep this description, and I'm describing, and then I'm explaining everything for you. So keep that in mind.
Before you explained for now at that time it
was confusing.
No one know about that.
Sure. That's why I thanks for bringing this up, and that's why I initially told you to not look at this. Okay, let's put that aside. Any other comments on the DRA thing? Any other opinions? Should we pursue it? I'm really on the fence here. I do see the advantage of having this resource claim already inside the pod spec, so we don't have to go through that hurdle at all, and then just deal with this pod network name. But then when I think about it, that the cap as a design, as a thing, it's kind of forced, and we are leveraging some other objects to do networking, which it's very awkward. That's what I feel. Any other comments?
So sorry. Okay. So I have the another question is hold on a sec. So you mentioned that you want to use the DRS, the resource, the scheduling for the scheme. But on the other side, you also going to have the scheduler for network, right? I mean that the pod network may have the node selector or some fields to specifying. So
that will be used for the same. I will leverage the array for that purpose.
Oh, so in the DRA integration case, that you do not adding the node implementation, node selector implementations in the pod network, and then this somehow you
is
want
independent. I find those, Tomo, I find those things independent. Whether we go with one API or the other, I am still planning on leveraging the DRA for scheduler. Because they already have the, yeah. So basically what the scheduler would say is, oh, you have pod networks. Okay, go call that into DRA, and this is the driver, because that will be like a standardized driver. Or maybe we can introduce a driver field into this object then. When we're gonna talk about when we're going to talk about that scheduler piece in phase 2, maybe we can expand the pod network object to include the driver in it. And when you not specify it, it will just default to the core that we will provide. But you can create your own, and then you can have your own custom one that does something slightly different, right? So regardless of what API we use, I definitely will propose and will drive to reuse the whole scheduler for DRA. The DRA code would just look at pod networks or still the resource claims. Even with the resource claims, it will have to understand what is the pod network field here. So regardless of which APIs we would choose, I still just want to reuse the DRA code to do the scheduling piece.
So to me, I'm just thinking, I think that the resource schedules, the how do I say, so resource schedule of the based on the device plugin, I don't know, the DRAs, drivers, the resource the resource information, and then the pod network, the pod network resource. I mean that this is about the not the device resource. I mean that network resource.
Okay.
It is the different the requirement, right? I'm thinking so. Maybe the at least the kubelet should when the pod is launched, and then the kubelet, the scheduler should get the both requirements. I mean that for pod network, the pod network objects have the node selector. At that time, the node ABC is available, DEF is not. And then the DRA case, and then also that this pod has a DRA resource claim. At that time, also the kubelet should check that the scheduler should check the DRA information. At that time, maybe the device is only in the air or some stuff, and then then the scheduler should return the intersection that these the scheduler. So I mean that at that time
finish your thought. Yeah.
So we should we do, how to say, so we should not reusing the DRA's the resource scheduling. I mean that the DRA resource schedule is of course required, but on the other side, then the pod network side is also needs to be the scheduler running the scheduler for the which node can be available, and then the both result, and then we should do some intersection or some stuff.
So that is going to happen. I assume, Tomo, I assume the resource claim, keep in mind, resource claim is a list. So they already support that because you can specify multiple elements here. So I assume they do that, right? They do for each element in that list, they will query the appropriate controller, get the list of the nodes, filter things, and they go to the next one and do the same, right? So that's already happening, and it's not like whenever you specify. Let's say we would go with this one.
I'm just thinking that the how do I say, the pod I mean that the two how do I say, I suppose using the pod network the attachment. I mean at the above the original implementations, the inside the kubelet, the scheduler, we can do the both scheduling and then the finding the intersection with, and then we get the actual target node. I mean that we do not we do not need the reusing the resource claims field to do the schedule. I mean that.
I agree that's true. We don't have to kind of have those fields to kind of leverage that scheduler piece, right? And basically even later on in the kubelet side, when we can then, when we're going to talk after this, when we decide on that API, we can talk about the CNI API integration, and then we can talk on how we are going to pass some of that information down to the CRI, right? Are we just leveraging what the array did and just pass a string or something? I'm not sure how they do it. I'm just throwing. Someone was mentioning about like passing a string with a name. So I wonder, is that sufficient for us and just leverage the array path and be done with it, or do we do something else, right? So that's something that we can then discuss. But I think, are we agreeing all that what I'm hearing is having explicit pod networks is more readable, and basically let's reuse the array under the hood, but from the API point of view on the top level, let's have it for usability, for better understanding of the things to be exposed through the spec directly. Is that what we are all saying?
But of course the pod network field, the pod network field is a little bit vague. Let me check that. The pod network attachment structure should have there some pointer to which resource is used, right? I mean, in the Maltus case, the network attachment definition doesn't how do I say? So in the Maltus case, we have the one field to making association which net attached therefore is use which resource. So maybe that we should also have this stuff in the pod network attachment, the field, or somewhere else.
I wouldn't want to mix those. So basically you say to expand this attachment definition to have the resource claim here. That's not generic, Tomo.
So you are going to adding the resource claim object into the pod network attachment?
No, I'm saying this is a no-go. This option is, I would say I would not do this.
No. I'm just talking about not the DRA integration field. I'm just talking about the original, the first option, which using the pod network attachment object. At that time, we somewhere we need to specify, we need to mention the which network using the which resource of the DRA, right?
No, because the network is the resource itself. What you're asking for is, and get, if I'm not understanding, how would I integrate this with a, let's say, SROV? All right, if I were to use, or some other, let's say I would, instead of doing the device plugin stuff, I would just use the array for my SROV. And how now I attach or link my network to that resource. And I would say, do it in your parameters. And this is what Jaime was saying as well. You could, where was it here? You could point to that resource, which is awkward. And I'm not sure whether that will be the best way. What if inside here,
if you think that,
let me finish. Give me a second. If you were to here point to the network attachment definition, and that network attachment definition points to the resource claim, won't that work for you as well? And that's then, I know I'm pushing that on you, on the implementation, you meaning your implementation rather here. And it's because I don't see why we would want to have the pod network pointing to the resource claim at all.
I believe the resource claim is the how do I say? The seems to be the how do I say? In for example, the pod network, the data plane may have the multiple parameterless object. One is the net attached def, and the second is the resource claim or some. I mean that so currently the based on this design, the params-ref can only have the one object, right? But so that this means the network attached def should contains the including the resource claims. But also in this case, I think this port network may have could have the two object as a params-ref. One is the network attached def, and another
a list.
Yes,
so this
list.
could be a list. I assume that's. I'm not saying not. I think that's something we can consider. Should this params-ref be a list, right? Because I think it could, right? It could point to multiple elements, and then your implementation needs to understand that. Because keep in mind, this params-ref is for the implementations. It's not for. It is not for.
But also
the core itself.
You mentioned that the first option, I mean that the port network attachment using the port network attachment. At that time, the resource claim is in the port network object as the params-ref, right? But so this means if the params-ref only accepting the one object, at that time the implementations care about that, because the params-ref.
No, that's fine, Tom. But my idea was because if it's an implementation specific thing, just reference this in your implementation. Why can you not do that? Because it will still only be used by your implementation. It's not something. That's why I would be on the fence a bit to make this a list. But I think we are at the time, Tomo. Let's shelve this. I will add the topic into next week's agenda to continue on that. But can we end today's meeting with the decision that we are keeping to this? And can I have an eyes at least, so it's not silent?
But let me add just for the comments. Maybe the params-ref should be the list.
Yeah, let's continue that part, Tomo, on next week.
Yep, and then also the meeting chat. Doug is mentioned that network selection mechanism needs the bigger focused discussions.
Network selection.
No, selection mechanism.
Yeah, I see. What do you have in mind, Doug, about that one? This is for the scheduler. Oh, he left. Okay, he left. All right, folks. Pete,
let's continue to discuss.
Yeah, Pete, just last. You have because I you've been feeling strongly about DRA.
Yeah, so I'm not wedded to DRA as such. There's a couple of things I think I do have strong feelings about, though. One is I think the pod network attachment, having that in the pod, I think that's the right thing. I do think the idea of using DRA is good. I'd like to think a bit more about that and make sure that it's not going to be a sledgehammer to crack a nut, because I have a concern that DRA is a very big complex thing. Although I believe it can be quite simple if you deploy it in particular ways, because it doesn't need to do anything very complicated. The final thing is I think there is a requirement that we can have a pod specify a bunch of parameters that are specific to the type of network it's got. But I think resource claims for that actually probably are fine. You can have a resource claim, maybe have a resource claim that links to a resource that has a link to pod network or something. And at that point, you're completely out of this proposal. You're into, here's a way you could do it with some custom resources. And that's really all I want, is the ability to put custom resources in for the crazy use cases. So I think this might be going to a good place. I do feel what I want to do is I probably want to write down, maybe this, I don't know whether you're going to do this, but I'd like to write down a more detailed proposal of what are we actually proposing here and how DRA fits in. I don't know if it'd be useful if I tried to write that up, or if you want to try and write that up and see if we can just agree, just in case we're talking at cross purposes.
I hope you have edit rights here, right, Pete? Please, if anything, just keep it in one file. Let's keep it here. Oh, do I have you? No, I I will add you here so that make sure you edit in this file. Let's not create multiple files. Just add section here and I will try to add you. Oh, that's you, right? Oh no, you're editor. Okay, there you go. So you should be able to edit this file. So please feel free to edit to this file. It's not my file. It's community's file.
Okay.
So please.
I'll put a section in with and try and clarify all this and try and just write down how I think it might work, and then we'll see if we can agree on it.
And as we talked, as I mentioned on the very beginning, the phases will go to a specific doc. So what we can say, something like I mentioned about the, where was this? I was mentioning about the default pod network and network migration story. I said that we have a story behind it, but has to be thought about when we're going to fully implement it. So it's not something that we will look at it in later phases. That's what I'm getting at. Let's mention it in such a way that DRA is something that we definitely want to leverage, but we're going to look at it from this and that perspective, and we're going to in detail talk about it later on, a bit later on. Is that's how I would imagine that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me.
Okay. All right, folks, let's call it. Thank you, everyone. Hear from you next week. Bye.
Thanks. Bye now.